This week we'll be doing something different. No builds or guides today, but me giving my honest opinion about something that's been going on in D&D right now. Welcome to the Attic Dungeon. My name is Sam, and whether you like your orcs aggressive or you like them chill and cultured, I'm here to opinionate everything. And with that silly intro, today's topic should be very clear. A lot has been going on about race, stereotypes, racism and all related topics. And just like anyone else, I have an opinion. And I actually feel like sharing it. Why? Because I can. Because I spent so much time on this game that I actually feel like I'm in a position to share some of my thoughts. Also, because it's YouTube, I have my own channel and I can create the content that I like. Yay! Disclaimer, it is going to be important that you hear my entire rant. Usually, I put some markers down for specific content in the video so you can scroll to what you need, but here there is a big risk of you missing a bunch of context and thus misinterpreting what I'm saying. If you cannot imagine yourself sitting through an entire explanation and paying some attention before responding while remembering the context, I'm afraid this is not going to be your video. So, what's been going on? There has been a group of people claiming that the depictions of some races or groups of people in the game and in the source material has been discriminatory and or racist. Wizards of the Coast has posted an article about changes that they're planning to make to some groups of people in the game, most notably the Drow and the Vistani, two cultures that carry a lot of negative stereotypes alongside them. They also used the Oberon and the Oberon Orcs as examples of reworks that carry a lot less negative stereotypes about the races than the original orc race did. Let's have a look where people took offense, how Wizard tried to solve it, and how my wonderfully honest opinion might add something to your thoughts about the topic. Most of the points that I'm going to make today will be demonstrated by using the orcs as an example, but I'll draw in the other races and cultures on occasion to prove a point. The discussion about orcs is often led back to this tweet. The poster takes serious offense to the fact that it is said that orcs, even when being nurtured in a caring environment, can only develop rather a limited amount of empathy and other generally positive feelings. Some people follow this person, some people say, dude, make a difference between fantasy and reality. Some other people take offense to this and the fact that the orcs receive a -2 intelligence penalty upon creation. Other people are not okay with the fact that some entire cultures, like the orcs and the drow, are being written off as aggressive, a bit primal, evil, dark, whatsoever. The medium being Twitter, of course, the discussion is not that deep. No surprise there, but it did create a decent ripple online and quite a few people have been writing about it. I'll post some material in the description down below if you want to read. Go on, educate yourself. Let's start by looking at orcs. The way the standard D&D orc is portrayed in the source material is not unlike the way we find orcs in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Darker skin, evil, very limited emotions. They hate a lot of things that we describe as being good and or beautiful. So let's have a look at each of these aspects and see if they truly have racist origins or have reasons to be interpreted as such. Let's start with the way they are depicted in 5e source material. Dark-skinned, usually grayish, not really black like the Lord of the Rings orc, but certainly not a light color. And wherever evil races are dark-skinned, be it the orcs, who are more greyish, but if you have a look at the drow, they are pretty much a dark black race. Accusations of racism are never far away, but the allegation that the skin color of the fantasy race has anything whatsoever to do with the color of people in real life is just dead wrong. The reason so many things that are evil in stories, in mythologies, in human culture are depicted as black is plain and simple, and I can phrase it with a Game of Thrones quote. For the night is dark and full of terror. Early men feared the night. It's dark. we can't function as well in the dark as we can in the light. The night was unsafe for early humans. It became associated with all types of unpleasant stuff. And the symbolism that goes with night versus day, light versus dark, permeates in so many different mythologies. Greek mythology has Helios, the sun god, chasing through the skies and his sun chariot chasing away the darkness. In Egyptian mythology, we find Khepri, a scarab rolling the sun through the sky. Other mythologies have stories about light removing darkness as well. Native American mythology has a story about Ant-Woman who won the light from her creator, and the Bible as well says that God made light in the darkness to chase it away. Human mythology likes the light, doesn't like the darkness. It's pretty simple. That's the way it is. There are a few exceptions here and there, of course. In Norse mythology, the night goddess is not only attributed with bad stuff, she also causes morning dew, for example, which is a nice thing. But most stories that have to do with light and darkness depict light as being good, dark as being bad, because we live in the light. If we lived underground in darkness, it could have been completely different, but that is not the case. So it makes sense that when you're depicting a force of darkness, like the orcs in Lord of the Rings and the orcs in D&D, how they originally began, not as a player race, it makes so much sense that they're not golden creatures that radiate light, but foul, dark things that want to see the world burn. So, a conclusion of argument number 1, orcs, or honestly any evil creature like a drow being black by design, has nothing to do with racial references, but with millennia old mythology depicting black and white as forces of evil and good. So, second thing that people were offended by, orcs being depicted as having very limited empathy, and indeed any emotional range is very limited, and a very, very base intelligence. This one is going to be split up, and I'll start with the easy part. Orcs are not humans. They are a biologically different created fantasy race that have a very different purpose in the world than humans, dwarves, elves, whatever do. And it feels weird enough that I have to drag in some type of fantasy biology to open this argument, but let's continue it. The D&D orcs were created by Grumsh One-Eye. If you've read anything about him, it's probably that he's a nasty piece of evil god with a little aggression problem. So we can safely assume that Grumsh, as a complex divine being, has had the choice of choosing between evil, good, peace, aggression, and he chose to be an aggressive, evil god that likes conquering. He really, really likes conquering. Which is why he created the orcs. He created them to be his worshippers. So it makes perfect sense that they're incapable of superior empathy. Their god and creator doesn't need them to have it. He needs them to breed, conquer, and kill. Those are literally the things that Grumsh asks of his followers. Not just orcs, but if somebody else wants to follow him, that's what you have to do. Breed, kill, conquer. But if you create an entire race to follow your beliefs as a god, it makes so much sense that that is what they are aimed at doing. And I say it again, that's not my personal word, that's pretty much Grumsh lore if you look around for it. If I wanted to create a machine that makes coffee, I'm not going to research a function that makes lemonade. Of course, we're talking about the Forgotten Realms here, a world where gods exist and actively created races in their image, or to serve them. This explains again why empathy is not high on the orcs' things to do list. Just like any race, they were created to do things for their gods. Now, does that mean that any given orc is incapable of developing normal emotions? Of course not. even if the book says that with a lot of effort you might teach him basic empathy, it's a fantasy story in a fantasy world. Any orc, but especially your player character orc, can be an exception to the rule. Drow players so often play the non-evil exile from a society that is generally seen as very evil, yet these exiles don't stab everything to death. Usually, at least not their party. By the same rule, it is perfectly possible to play an orc that has developed or is developing a broader spectrum of emotions. It's your fantasy game, people, and if the people in your group are stopping you from making a complex orc, they are probably not the right group for you, or indeed for anyone. Next up is the -2 modifier to intelligence. Again, it stems from the idea that Grumsh didn't need smart worshippers. If you want to just breed, kill, conquer, you don't need Einstein in your population. He needed strong, angry followers, which is reflected in their racial bonuses, constitution, strength, and all the racials that they have. Now, this -2 modifier to intelligence, I'm against it. Not from a racial perspective, though, but from a gameplay perspective. I abhor negative attribute racials, and you used to have a lot more in Dungeon and Dragon related products. If you look at the very popular and still very beloved game Neverwinter Nights, which is heavily rooted in 3.5e, almost every race has a negative attribute score. For example, dwarves had a -2 on charisma, so that dwarf bard was pretty hard to accomplish because you started out really low on your charisma scale. And same with the orcs. Taking 2 intelligence away from their base stats means that something like an orc wizard or an orc artificer is gameplay wise actually a pretty bad idea. Sure, you can raise the stat with point buy and stuff like that, but you're always going to be lower than any of the other races because you had to start from a disadvantage. In 5e, there's 2 races with negative racial attributes. It's the orcs -intelligence and the kobolds -strength. If you want to differentiate races and their abilities to perform certain roles, there's other ways to do so. Halflings and gnomes, but let's talk halflings, can't properly wield 2-handed weapons because they're too small. They can, but then you have to roll with disadvantage, and if you're using a longsword, which is also a versatile weapon, they have to use the 2-handed function. They cannot wield a longsword in one hand. That is a racial downside. Their legs are shorter too, just like dwarves. They only get 25 feet of movement speed instead of the 30 or even 35 that some other races get. The trade-off is that they get pretty sweet racials like Lucky, which does raise your chance of actually hitting stuff. So whereas your Goliath party member can swing that delicious great axe for D12 critical hits, and the halfling will never be able to do that as well as the Goliath can. Never. That's just how the racials work. His other racials make up for it, still enabling him to be a very efficient 2-handed fighter because his chance to hit is always going to be higher than the Goliath's chance to hit because of their racials. And that's good design in my eyes. You don't just say to a race, "You're stupid, you shouldn't be wizarding." That's boring and bad gameplay design. The biological and cultural differences between the races are what makes them fun and interesting to play, and they should always be there. And they might cause your race to excel at a certain class. Obviously, your orc with a +2 strength is going to make one hell of a barbarian, for example, which is a very orky class to play. But your racials should never make you bad at any given class. I'm not saying that every class needs to be exactly the same, every race rather needs to be exactly the same and evenly capable in each class, but they shouldn't be worse than other classes. Your human wizard should be able to start at the same level as your orc wizard, but because of your racial bonuses, you could outperform something. The orc will not be able to start at 16 intelligence because he's got a neutral intelligence score at the start, but he will get there. He can get up to par with the other wizards. He just has a few less ability score increases to spend on feats and other stats. But he doesn't have to come from a huge setback that is starting at 6 intelligence pre-point buy. Now, wizards saw these comments, these complaints, these racist allegations, and they did something with it. I'm going to stick with my orc team for just a bit longer. They released 2 new types of orc. The first one being the Oberon Orcs, which came out with the last Oberon book that also introduced artificers. The orcs here are introduced as being the original inhabitants of the world and thus having a very rich culture. They've been everywhere, they've built everywhere, they know the place like no one else. They don't have the negative intelligence bonus, they do keep some of the racial attributes, and it explicitly says that the majority of these orcs is not a bunch of violent, bloodbath-causing wild men. And that's okay for me. If you want to step away from the angry orc, as we shall call him from now on, and you want to play a more cultured orc, maybe a bit more reminiscent of how the orcs in World of Warcraft are nowadays. They started out as bloodlust orcs as well, but they have been evolving towards a more cultured race as well. So if you want to harken back to those orcs as they are right now, I think the Oberon Orcs are really good. On the other hand, they have released the Orcs of Exandria, which are the Wildemount Orcs that I spoke of earlier, and they are a bit closer to the Angry Orc. They are also said, look, these orcs are not explicitly evil. They also remove the -2 intelligence debuff, and they remove the menacing racial attribute. Menacing used to give you automatic proficiency in intimidation. It got replaced with a different attribute, of which I forgot to look up the name, which gives you a choice out of, I think 5 or 6 skills to pick proficiency in, and intimidation is still amongst them. So you can still play your angry orc with all the same racial advantages, but without the racial disadvantage of the -2 intelligence. That being said, if you're playing an evil campaign or you just want to be a dumb angry orc, go for it. Pick the original angry orc race. Again, it is your fantasy game and you should be able to play the race that you want to without people at the table looking at you in a wrong way. And as long as these types of orc continue to coexist, I think the game is in a good place. Every player has the option to pick the type of orc that he or she likes, but whether it be OG Angry Orc 2.0, or Cultured Orc. And if you don't like the other type of orc, don't play it. It's simple, it's really simple as that. Just don't play it. I myself have never been a big fan of elves. I don't like how they act most of the time, so I just don't play them. I play dwarves and halflings and other things that are shorter than 1.60 m. I don't know. The occasional human does get thrown in, but it's simple as that. Wizards saw the problem. They said, okay, yeah, there might be something in there. Let's broaden up the spectrum a bit, but now the spectrum is there, and there is nothing wrong, still in my eyes, with the original orc, but you can now differentiate and take a different style of orc to fit your role-playing needs. And that is good marketing, I guess, because they're catering to some of their player base, but they cannot take away the original orc. Why not? Some people like to play as one, but mainly the original angry orcs are a devastating force of evil in so many stories. They don't have to be complex or cultured or emotional. They have to be this fearless ball of death that is heading towards a poor settlement. And for that you don't need a very complex race, you just need angry smashy orcs. Then a quick flyby to the Vistani. They were carrying a lot of negative stereotypes usually associated with gypsies, and so Wizards removed some of them. Very specifically, they did it, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago. They re-released books like Curse of Strahd, and they changed some stuff in there. The Vistani are no longer described as being drunk all the time. Oh, whoa, no, oh, poor me. They are not described as being lazy all the time. Again, oh no, what a problem. I think that's pretty okay. I mean, I could imagine, even if it's not the Vistani, but if any particular human culture, and remember, I'm going to say this again, human culture is being referred to in the game in a very negative way, that people of that culture could absolutely dislike the game for that. So I think it makes sense in the day and age where we live to make sure that you don't offend any human cultures by the way you're depicting them in the game. I keep repeating human cultures because I do actually really believe that you need to make a difference between fantasy races and the actual human race. Even the fantasy human race you have to be careful with, because a lot of things that you put in those could easily reflect on how people are in real life. But as long as your fantasy race is not a very super explicit reference to a specific type of people, I think it's really hard to ever condemn a fantasy race for being racist. Even, let's go out on a limb here, even if the race itself is racist. Like the drow are a bit discriminatory to anyone that is not a female or a drow, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not too neck deep into elf lore, you'll have to forgive me for that. So they're a bit discriminatory, they're a bit racist, but they're okay as a race because they're not humans and they're not referring to any type of humans in real life. So please do keep fantasy and reality apart. Fantasy stories always have had a strong anti-racism message behind them. And to combat racism, you actually need the occasional racist race, because if everybody in your world is perfect, there's not really anyone to fight about the racism now, is there? So you do need those evil races specifically for that purpose. Now, something else that Wizard changed, and which I heavily endorse, is removing alignment from a lot of races, NPCs, what have you. Like, if you open up the D&D books, they usually say, oh, 90% of this race is lawfully good, chaotic neutral, whatever. And I think removing that is really good. It already started to disappear step by step. There used to be alignment restrictions to the classes you could pick. A paladin had to be lawfully neutral. A barbarian, chaotic. And that obviously limits your playstyle. It takes you away from this playing this stoic barbarian that has a very strong honor code that he always follows, and he only goes into a rage when the code is violated. That is a lawful barbarian, and you couldn't do that back in the day, but now you can. So where they do this to cater to the fact that an entire culture cannot be condemned of being good or evil or what have you, because they don't just remove evil references, they take away good references as well. It opens up the RP perspective even more than 5e already did. 5e is all about challenging class, race, alignment combinations, and to do that, you kind of need to be able to do it. You need to lift those restrictions and keep alignment more as a role-playing tool than as a strict gameplay enforcing element. Use the alignment grid to place your character, to give it meaning in the world, to see how they will react, but it shouldn't be a part of this defining the absolute wholeness of your character, because that makes him a bit one-dimensional, doesn't it? If you're always chaotic good and always act like that, that would be sad. Sometimes you might actually want to act like a lawful neutral, or maybe a bit on the evil side to get something done. And that should be very possible in 5th edition. All these changes, the race changes, the alignment changes, what have you, people have been saying, oh my god, 5e is becoming such a grey mass, there's going to be nothing unique left to it. Excellent. No, you might get me wrong. I don't like grey masses in general, but I don't think D&D is ever going to be a grey mass. You will always have racial and cultural attributes. You will always have alignment hovering around there somewhere. But opening up all of these boxes allows you to create actually so many more unique characters and environment than a very strictly outlined system does. I love being able to play a chaotic paladin nowadays. You're sticking to an oath, but you don't thrive on chaos. Interesting concept. How are you going to roleplay this? So stuff like that I absolutely like. They're also planning to bring out a book that changes the way you receive your attribute bonuses. Now, there have been a few articles about this already on D&D Beyond, for example, on tying attribute bonuses to class, partially, rather than to race. And again, this opens up a lot more options when picking certain race class combinations. You can still look at your race for what makes them unique in terms of cool racials like medium armor mastery, the lucky feat, any skill proficiencies you gain, but you can play any class because you will receive at least a partial bonus to your primary attribute. Again, I think that's good design. It does not make the game grey. Only if your fantasy is a grey box, then the game will remain a grey box. By the way, the new attribute bonus system is going to be completely optional, of course, as is anything in a Dungeons and Dragons book, people. You don't have to use everything. I'll repeat it again, it's your fantasy world, you get to work it out together with your DM if you're a player. So in general, I really like where these changes are going. They're opening up so many possibilities in-game that it's really hard to call them bad. On the other hand though, I think Wizards is allowing them to be pushed a bit too hard by certain groups of people out there. And I think they've found a nice in-between spot where they can please both halves of the crowd. I hope they don't cross to either side of the crowd and completely piss off the other side. I mean, the game is in a good place. Changes to racial attribute systems, I completely applaud those as a game that has been around for so long. You constantly have to strive to kind of reinvent yourself, possibly even in the middle of an edition. 5e is going to last for quite a while, I believe, so it's good that they reevaluate the game. But I don't like the way how it's happening. People shouting out stuff like, orcs are racists, or they're discriminatory, the idea of an orc. That is so wrong. If you would have told Wizards, look, there has to be another type of orc. If you look around in popular culture, so many different types of orc, and you only have these dumb, angry orcs. What's up with that, Wizard? Would have worked a lot better than pressuring wizards into believing their evil race is a racist concept, which it is not. If you're still not completely convinced that the orcs as a whole are not a racist race, please, please, please read one of the articles down below. I'll mark it with a big thingy. It's a relatively long essay that is about Tolkien's orcs, their origins. They even go into explaining where the word orc came from. It's a really detailed essay that explains where everything comes from and why orcs are not racist. So please, if you want Wizard to change the game, do it in a positive way. And if you think something is wrong, do your research. And please play the game before you comment on it, because, and this is one of the things I might conclude with, something that does bother me is people who know nothing about a certain area commenting on it in a very public way and claiming they know better. That is halfly how the orc business got started. The person who made the tweet afterwards admitted that he almost never plays D&D because he doesn't like the game. But he still feels like he's in a place to comment on the state of the game. So that's what I don't like. The way how the discussion started and how it's being done. I do like the changes though, and I hope the game keeps evolving into a positive force that allows so many people to enjoy the game, because that's what a game is meant to do. You're allowed to enjoy it, and since this game allows you total creative freedom, it shouldn't be that hard to enjoy. And there you have it, my complete opinion on the state of D&D when it comes to racism at this point. I hope I've proven to you that I did my research before doing this, so I encourage you to do the same before you take any public opinion. I also hope I didn't chase you away, and I will see you again next time in the Attic Dungeon.